And welcome back, Section 3 with George McMillan III. He's going to tell us all the details about the six power center strategy and the Russo-Ukraine war. Did Russia really attack Ukraine for no reason? Like we said in the last video, don't forget to subscribe, share, and like this video. George, take it away.
All right, so Section 3 is Thucydides' trap in the six power center strategy and the Russo-Ukraine war. Did Russia really attack Ukraine for no reason? We're doing another evolution of the great game from Mackinder to Brzezinski to the Wolfowitz and the Rams reports, and why it was perceived so crucial for the eastward expansion of NATO into Eastern Europe, which then puts them in Poland, Ukraine, and Georgia, where all the pipelines go through. So we're kind of answering the question up front. We already went through the six areas to work counterclockwise around Eurasia. And we already talked about the Russia was only two infrastructural projects away from integrating five of the six power centers. And that was they need the Cash to Chabahar railway link to complete the INSTC, the international north-south trade corridor from Iran to India. And then the other one was a much bigger project that'll take a lot longer, and that was the Hokkaido to Sakhalin under the sea tunnel railway and pipeline project. So the timing of this thing, of the withdrawal from Afghanistan, and then the pivot to Ukraine was timed. And then Blinken even said that, even had a statement within the past couple of days, Secretary of State Antony Blinken, so I'm talking about, was that they had to pivot to Ukraine months in advance. So people have been saying, oh, you knew there was going to be a Russian invasion. Well, why would you know that? So we want to explain in this video how they would know that in advance. So let's see, the first slide set here. Let's go to the next one. The one with the great game on it with Hopkirk. Yeah, this is the six power centers strategy I went over with Matt Bracken and Felix Rexhow. It's the evolution of Mackinder to Peter Hopkirk's great game. That was the struggle for empire in Central Asia in 1990. He wrote that in that book he was talking about in the late 1700s during the reign of Catherine the Great. The Russians were trying to go through Turkmenistan and Uzbekistan into Afghanistan with the goal of getting a seaport in Baluchistan. Back then, Afghanistan and Baluchistan would have been one country. Now, part of Baluchistan is in Iran. The other half of it is in Pakistan, and Afghanistan is now a landlocked country. Okay. So let's see, there's three issues in this video. We want to bring up John Pilger in the which video is this? I gotta look at my reading glasses. This is was it The Guardian? Yeah, I think this is John Pilger's in The Guardian. Oh yeah, there it is. On May 13th in 2014, it says, in Ukraine, the U.S. is dragging us to war with Russia. So I threw this in there because it's not just Mearsheimer and Peter Cohen that were arguing that the eastward expansion of NATO was going to cause problems. This was also in the mainstream media. I posted up a whole bunch of videos on LinkedIn talking about that too over the weekend. While I was doing research for this and some other things. Then the second article is the fake Rand report that Naya Dagblaudet posted on September 13th, and then the Welt Express posted copies of it a week later. The third aspect I covered in the Constantine video. Audio came out bad, but we covered it, and it was Fiona Hill's interview with Lex Fridman, where it's a 3.5-hour interview, and the bottom line up front is right at the beginning. She talks about, Putin must have some rationale, but we have to do he needs a psychoanalysis in order to understand why he attacked, like it's a psychological problem instead of a geostrategic issue. I think we went over it in the past few videos, especially in the last one where we went over the detailed slide set with the infrastructural maps, that this is a geopolitical, geostrategic issue. It is not a psychological issue. And it's something I keep on saying, like every week in the Washington Post or the New York Times or CNN, none of the geopolitical, geostrategic stuff is discussed. It's Putin's crazy, Putin's irrational. It's for anyone that knows about the subject material, it's a bunch of garbage.
For the people who haven't seen it, let's play it. I got it queued up. Let me just find it here. Let's play it for everyone.
In his own context, we've got to understand that. We've got to understand that he would take offense at something and he would take action over something. It doesn't mean to say that, we are necessarily to blame by taking actions, but we are to blame when we don't understand the consequences of things that we do and act accordingly, or, take preventative action or recognize that something might happen as a result of something.
What is the...
All right, I think that's enough of that.
Yeah, okay, yeah, so you had it in subtitles?
Yeah, just for everybody to follow along.
Yeah, in the Felix Rex show, he was able to play the video, and I just turned up my speakers for the audio.
Yeah,
but
the audience can hear it, but you can't. I just don't want to play too much of it because I don't want to get any kind of strike or anything. In any case, I'll let you continue.
Yeah. So, we'll let the audience decide whether she's incompetent and doesn't know the literature, or she's an actress, or some kind of combination of both. She speaks 5 different languages, and she's a Russian studies major is her background, and she got onto the National Security Council. So, yeah, she's not a geopolitical analyst or an economic or political development theorist. She's a linguist, so she's not supposed, she doesn't have to know everything, but she should know the basics. And in that video, she doesn't know the basics at all. And a lot of these basics of this discipline, you can go online and watch videos of Mackinder and Nicholas Spikeman. There's one guy that does it, was Mr. Sin or something like that does it for a high school advanced placement history class. So, I mean, just saying that the information's out there. She doesn't have to know everything, but you would be thinking that if she actually was on the National Security Council advising the president, she could at least watch a few hours of videos here and there just to learn the basics of this field. Because otherwise, what exactly is she advising a president to do if she's saying that Putin needs a psychological analysis when he's, purely acting out for geopolitical, geostrategic means? I was watching another video yesterday, and somebody was, Dan Kovalek was talking about how he went to the Donbass recently, and he's a professor, I forget where, but he was talking about how all the Russian people in the Donbass area, because they've been in conflict since 2014 or before, they were all aware of Zbigniew Brzezinski's The Grand Chessboard. So you have the population of the Donbass is aware of the United States geostrategic plans, or at least the literature involved in that.
So are cab drivers in Moscow. I can vouch for that, definitely.
Oh, okay. Well, yeah. See, but you're telling me that that somebody that was actually on the National Security Council is completely unaware of it? Yeah, we'll let the audience decide whether in that video she's an actress or she just generally doesn't know. Some kind of combination of both. So that was, because we already went over what the importance of Crimea is, as far as there's a number of oil and gas pipelines that come out in that area. There's big, huge Brisba pipeline that goes through Ukraine. That's the main backbone of the pipelines going into Eastern Europe. Then there's the Yamal pipeline and the Nordstream is meant to not go through Poland or Ukraine, so they don't have to deal with people adding transfer fees and making them use the petrodollar. So we already went through that. So here what's really fascinating is a whole bunch of different side issues to this, because they're trying to keep, under the old five power center doctrine, where the United States is in the number one position, they're desperately trying to keep Western Europe into the North American camp. So if they're integrated with Russia, well, then they leave the United States orbit and they get into the Russian orbit. So the fake RAND report, because they say it's fake, other people say it's leaked. Again, we don't want to get into that, because we'll just let the audience decide what they want to believe. But I do want to go over the subject matter, because whoever wrote it is definitely a subject matter expert. And it's the content that we want to go over, not the authenticity of the document, just to make that clear.
Yeah, whether it's a fake or not, what it says can be analyzed and, correlated or not to reality.
Yeah. And it's a good way, because we need to get into, you can go from either direction. We started with Mackinder and went to Spikeman talking about, in the sixth power center theory. I think, without explaining their theories into detail, my modern day explanation that they're using it to cut off pipelines and ports and railroad infrastructure, I think people can get the gist of the land power versus sea power strategies from that without going into more detail. But this one talks about, in the last videos we talked about we talked about a whole bunch of problems, but two's pertinent here. The United States deindustrialized, and Germany's integrating with Russia. So now we're going to see how the United States reindustrializes and actually tries to reindustrialize by deindustrializing Germany and shifting their businesses to the United States. Okay, here on go down to the next slide. The next one. Yeah, that one. All right. This is the URLs and the screenshot of Rand denying the authenticity of that report. So we have to, we're going to throw that in there, that Rand has denied it. Okay, you can go to the next slide now. Okay, this is the Wolfowitz 1992 article. It was it's an NSC fiscal year 1994 to 1999 document. In this one, it opens up that you can have an integration of Russia and a peaceful coexistence, or even and even an alliance. So it opens up that at the beginning, But on the contrary, it also starts talking about the United States should try to convert all the governments over to democratic forms of government, which is a good thing. Some of the most corrupt governments in the world are in the Middle East and Central Asia. There's no doubt about that. That part's not in question. The parts in question is how you do it. Because, okay, obviously they're cracking down on censorship in North America and in the West. So, I mean, we're becoming more like, the authoritarian governments. That part's kind of crazy. Also, if you're going to move to democratic processes on the economic side, because I do the reason why I talk about my lateral integration of frameworks in my universal behavioral theory is the Aristotle 6 forms of government, per capita GDP function, and the 4-category geopolitical form model correlate directly on a tight versus catastrophically loose wage labor rate. And the reason why that's important is if you're going to diversify the consensus scale in Aristotle's 6 forms of government, i.e. move towards democratic processes in a republican form of government, so you have a democracy and you have a court system and you have a legislative system. You've broken up political power into 3 different branches. You also need to break up economic power. So you want to diminish and prevent monopolies and oligopolies, and you want to move towards a perfect competition model. Well, after the fall of the Soviet Union, when Gorbachev and then Yeltsin was getting assistance from, he got assistance from the Harvard Economics Department. So, Jeffrey Sachs was involved. Well, he was young at that time, but Larry Summers, he's the advisor for Obama, and I believe an advisor for Clinton also. They were instrumental in assisting these governments from breaking up the communist system manufacturing facilities, but they were put into the hands of too few people. Now, Jeffrey Sachs, what he's been talking about in his videos of late is that he objected to letting this power get too concentrated. He wanted to move it into more perfect competition, but he was successful in doing that in Ukraine, but they didn't want to, the government, either administration didn't really want to listen to him as far as Russia. So it became apparent to him they wanted power concentrated, because it's easier to control a few people than a perfect competition model. So they moved towards a monopoly oligopoly model with oligarchs. But once you've concentrated economic power, you can forget about any kind of democratic processes of ever occurring. So the mainstream media in the United States likes to put it all on Putin. Oh, Putin's a dictator, Putin's this. Well, they over-concentrated economic power during the 90s. They wanted a weak dictator in Yeltsin, which they got. The pro-Russian nationalist oligarchs, of course, did not like Yeltsin. The Western oligarchs did. So ever since then, there's been a fight in Russia of the nationalist Russians wanting to get rid of the Western-oriented oligarchs. So that's the power struggle that's been occurring. So when the Western media says, well, the oligarchs want to get rid of Putin, I mean, it's not factual at all. It doesn't explain the dynamics of what's occurring in Russia. So in this Wolfowitz document, what they're talking about is this dichotomy of not letting Russia ever become an economic power where it could become a superpower ever again. So it goes through that dichotomy. And so then the RAND documents in the mid to late 90s and early 2000s accelerate that. But now we have a change of government. Reagan's no longer in power. A pro-US Clinton's not in power. We now have a shift where the Obama tried to transform America. And again, I have a whole set of papers I wrote on that for punchingbackpost.com earlier in the year of what the transformation of America means. It's whenever someone says that, what they're necessarily referring to is Rousseau's Origin of Inequality from 1658, where he starts talking about the property rights. He attributes property rights to class inequality because then men subjugate other men. Then he attributes men subjugating women to the advent of marital rights in evolutionary theory, or in anthropology, I should say. So then he says, well, since thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not commit adultery is in the Ten Commandments, he attributes inequality of race and gender and class to the Abrahamic religions. And since France is a Catholic country, he really focuses on Christianity. So you have to get rid of Christianity to get rid of marital rights, property rights. And then you'll have wives and children in common. So moving from Rousseau to Marx, The Origin of the Family, Private Property, and the State, 1884, the goal is to have wives in common, children in common. So then there's no family structure. So then the children have a direct allegiance to the state. Without that, with a family structure, you have an allegiance to a family first, extended family second, then tribe or clan, and then the nation state. So an internationalist government is trying to get rid of all those family, extended family, tribal, clan, and nationalistic boundaries to get to a one world government. So that principally comes from two books, Rousseau's Origin of Inequality and Engels' The Family, the State, and Private Property. So you have a shift when Obama becomes president. He wants to transform America. He necessarily means expanding the bureaucracies to make it a socialist system, following the incrementalist socialist ideal of the Fabian socialists, and also diluting the nuclear family. So you have those two things occurring in the United States, but it flip-flopped with Russia because the Soviet Union and Marxism failed. Now they want to go back to Orthodox Christianity to rebuild the country. So they want to rebuild the nuclear family, the church, marriage rights and property rights, because communism gets rid of property rights and they never could get rid of marital rights. It didn't really work that way. It kind of ended up in something in between. So the United States is moving towards getting rid of marital rights and property rights, and now Russia has gone back to that. So before, we were talking about in the last video, a lot of us thought you would have an integration of North America, Western Europe, and a new Russia. Well, the politics in the United States changed. And why that changed, again, when we get into the unified behavioral theory and the comparison between conservative and leftist thought, we'll get into that in more detail, because that Tubia and Kosmida's book, The Psychological Foundations of Culture, talk about how once the 1960s liberals took over the department chairs in the university system in the 1980s, that's when they abandoned the scientific project. Then what I'm saying is that's when the transformation of America started taking place, because they started, once you take over the university system, they took over the press. They've taken over the politicians, and the theological schools. They teach Paulo Freire. So they start taking over the Long March. Well, they do the Long March of the institutions. That's a Gramsci reestablishment of Marxism. So we're already well along in that phase by now. For anyone that's familiar with the Yuri Bezmenov videos, where he talks about the communist effort
to change the
demoralize
societal fabric of the U.S., basically, how it can be accomplished within 20 years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He did those series of videos, and a lot of people have been watching it the past couple of years. They're like, oh, wow, this is what the Soviet Union or the Russians are up to. Oh, no, by the time that Yuri Bezmenov did those interviews in the mid-'80s, the department chairs, or the 1960s liberals in the department had already taken over the department chairs of the university system. So it was eventually accomplished as he was delivering the speech. And people don't realize that. And again, the books that I point to is The Adapted Mind, where, well, you can download the Psychological Foundations of Culture on PDF form from UCSB, University of California, Santa Barbara. And the second book was Alan Bloom's Closing of the American Mind. That he's a philosophy professor from Chicago that he's a Rousseau expert. He died a few years after that. He was writing about, once you took away Plato and Aristotle out of the university system, people stopped understanding what the perennial questions were to have a democracy versus other forms of government. And then he thought that that students were getting too radicalized with Marcuse's repressive tolerance, and started the 1960s Maoist tactics of shouting professors down. So that's where all that comes from. So the Wolfowitz doctrine takes place in context of everything I just said. So you can look at it, at the Wolfowitz doctrine, this paper here, a number of different ways, because he seems like he, in some parts of this, okay, different people contributed different parts to this, but in some ways, some of the people, really wanted to welcome Russia back into the fold and have a peaceful, Kantian eternal peace between the former superpower rivals. But then the politics changes to where, if the left gets in power, they want to wipe out Christianity in North America, and they want to wipe out Christianity in Western Europe, following Rousseau and Engels and Marx. And now they want to prevent the rebuilding of the Orthodox Church in Russia. So it changes the agenda for that constituency. And just to give the European audience a background, Matt Bracken had done several videos on this before in his other shows, where where some of people associated with Obama were actually part of the Weather Underground. We're talking about Bill Ayers and Jeremiah Wright. The Weather Underground was leftist terrorist organizations that were big in Chicago and the northern end of Manhattan, up by Columbia University.
Yeah, the Weather Underground is something that most people haven't dug out of the closet, probably. But yes, I've heard of them in passing. Let's put it that way.
Oh, yeah. So you also had the Black Liberation Movement and the Black Panther movements in Harlem. So there was a lot of leftist activity in that in the northern end of Manhattan during that time frame. And some people argue that Franklin Marshall Davis is actually Obama's real father, and he was part of the Weather Underground, and he was in Hawaii. I can't verify any of that. I'm just saying that some people say that. But what you can say is that he's definitely associated with a lot of people that were involved in the Weather Underground, and their chief document was a document called Prairie Fires. A spark can create a forest fire, or one spark can create a prairie fire. I think that was the name of it. It was a Maoist doctrine of how instead of trying to stir up the proletariat, you can achieve a Maoist cultural revolution by other means. So that's what they were trying to do. So even though that this Wolfowitz doctrine tries to argue that the United States should be the only superpower to get other countries to become a democracy. Well, that's one way to look at it. But for the left that's trying to transform America, they want to transfer the world into a one world socialist order. So now they're going to look at, people of that persuasion, coming out of the modern woke university system, are going to use this Wolfowitz doctrine much differently than the way I would look at it, because I'm Austrian school and Christian. So you can look at this doctrine a number of different ways, and how you implement it depends on what your beliefs are. In the other videos, I do the rational actor belief preference constraint models to focus in on how what your beliefs are is how you actually implement a plan. All right. So that being said, there's a lot in this Wolfowitz argument doctrine, and there's a lot of different ways you can look at it. But the way that is being put into place now is, like Colonel McGregor talks about, it's to wipe out Christianity in North America, Western Europe, and in Russia. All right, I'm just gonna read through this. I think in that Constantine video that I did, the audio didn't come in very well, but the audio is coming in right now. Is fine right now, right?
Yeah. I think this should be excellent. And if you want later on, separate from the whole segment, we can just cut out this piece and upload it separately as well.
Oh yeah. Let's just read through this, just because there's so much material I want to get to, and then I'm getting volunteers like yourself to help me with the tech, because I'm busy doing the research. I'm so backed up on research. I just want to just blow this stuff out, put it on YouTube, and get it out to the general public. Because even that, I don't know how long it took me to explain the different ways to look at that Wolfowitz doctrine. A lot of people just are completely unaware of this.
Yep. Take it away.
So, all right. Okay. The present state of the U.S. economy does not suggest that it can function without financial and material support from external sources. The quantitative easing policy, which the Fed has resorted to regularly in recent years, as well as the uncontrolled issue of cash during the 2020 and 2021 COVID lockdowns, have led to a sharp increase in external debt and an increase in the dollar supply. The continuing deterioration of the economic situation is highly likely to lead to a loss in the position of the Democratic Party in Congress and the Senate in the forthcoming elections to be held in November 2022. The impeachment of the president cannot be ruled out under these circumstances, which must be avoided at all costs. There is an urgent need for resources to flow into the national economy especially the banking system. Only European countries bound by EU and NATO commitments will be able to provide them without significant military and political costs for us. The major obstacle to it is the growing independence of Germany. Although it is still a country with limited sovereignty, for decades it has been consistently moving towards lifting these limitations and becoming a fully independent state. This movement is slow and cautious, but steady. Extrapolation shows the ultimate goal can be achieved only in several decades. However, if social and economic problems in the United States escalate, the pace could accelerate significantly. So I guess what we'll do is I'll read a slide and we'll talk about it and then do the next slide, because
All right, sounds good.
each paragraph is really significant. Whoever wrote this is a subject matter expert. We just want to go over the content, not discuss the authenticity of the document. We'll take it for face value that it's a fake RAND document.
The authenticity is there. It's just the author that is not known. You know, it's a real document. It exists. The disputed fact is whether it's authored by RAND or not. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, exactly. So, yes, this is interesting because they're acknowledging, okay, the United States just crossed $31 trillion in debt. Everybody knows me. I've been talking about it. $30 trillion in debt. I've been arguing for a decade now that the United States is going to go into inflation, and at $35 trillion in debt, the United States is going to go into higher levels of inflation, if not rampant inflation. The problem with that is the United States wasn't supposed to hit $30 trillion in debt until 2027, according to GAO estimates done 5 years ago. And the United States wasn't supposed to hit $35 trillion in debt until 2033-ish. So I think we ended up the Bush administration with about 10 trillion in debt. Then the Obama administration was at 20 trillion in debt. And then we added another 10 trillion under Trump. I mean, this is insane. And what's greatly accelerated
it's
is
a lot
COVID.
of trillions. It's a lot of trillions, and
It's a lot of trillions.
In the recent few years, let's say, there's been a lot of QE 3 and 4 and 2 and 1. And then, like you say, during COVID, they decided to make it QE forever.
So the COVID lockdowns, just under, well, they did it on purpose, but yeah, it just exploded under Trump. They added another 10 trillion in 4 years. They didn't even wait 10 years. So instead of reaching 30 trillion and 35 trillion benchmarks that I've been, looking at for 10 years now, all of a sudden we're already at 31 trillion now, and it's 2022. So we're ahead on everything by 5 years now because of COVID and everything else. Well, then in the transformation of America, I mean, people are confused. You transition a democracy, a free market democracy to socialism just by expanding the bureaucracies. There's nothing magical about it. It's you just gradually just get there. So then to see, it talks about the continuing deterioration of the United States. Well, like I explained in the last video with the Prestowitz book, Trading Places, and Robert Reich's New Deals, written during the mid to late 80s, we've been deindustrializing from the 1980s, 1990s on. So now the United States has to reindustrialize in order to counter China's rise to superpower status and the reemergence of Russia. So now it says, well, where are they going to get it? And it says, well, only Western Europe has the resources. And then they start talking about, well, their growing independence of Germany. Well, with the with the more cheap Russian gas Germany got, the more competitive their high-tech manufacturing businesses got, and the stronger Germany gets. Remember, I keep on talking about Pomesian and dime integration, political, military, economic, social, infrastructural, informational, and dime diplomatic, infrastructural, informational, military, and economic. Once you increase infrastructure, especially energy infrastructure, and it lowers your industrial costs, then your economy gets much stronger, especially your export and export-led growth strategy increases. So Germany is expanding significantly economically with cheap Russian gas, which is why Eric Schmidt, and then Angela Merkel started and completed Nordstream 1 and 2, because they want to keep this expansion going. Now, at odds here is the Constitution for Germany was written by the Allied powers right at the end of World War II. So a lot of Germans are saying that this is really, it's not a German document, it's externally compelled on Germany, and they wanted to actually change it. So you have this going on in Germany, and a rising independence in Germany. So this document is reflecting those controversies that are taking place, because if Germany becomes independent, then Germany is up in Europe. Russia's into Europe with the Nord Streams, and then that pushes the United States kind of irrelevant in Europe. So then that's out of the Europe. So that's opposite of what NATO is supposed to do.
So you're saying
Plus,
German sovereignty is a bad thing. That's what you're getting at.
For this document.
Yeah.
For this document.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, not me personally. I don't live there. I don't, So, yeah, I personally have no say in the matter, right? Yeah. So in the previous document, remember I had, it's still on the same slide set, that Germany has a huge oil and gas and natural gas pipeline system to it, a huge network. So it can become, that one. Yeah, there you go. So if Nord Stream was completed, or the South Stream through the Black Sea was completed through Bulgaria and Serbia, and if it fed either Austria or Germany, well, then it can feed the whole Danube River Valley. And if the whole Danube River Valley countries left the petrodollar system and started trading euros and rubles for gas and oil, then that would basically sink the petrodollar trading system, and the money wouldn't be flowing through Wall Street and the city of London as it has been in the past, which would upset, it would offend big finance, obviously. All right, let's move back. Let's move to the next slide on the, I'll read it. Yeah, the next one down. Yeah, that one. And then, there you go. An additional factor contributing to Germany's economic independence is Brexit. With the withdrawal of the UK from the EU structures, we have lost a meaningful opportunity to influence the negotiation of cross-governmental decisions. It is fear of our negative response, by and large, determines the relatively slow speed of those changes. If one day we abandon Europe, there will be a good chance for Germany and France to get to a full political consensus. Then Italy and old Europe countries, primarily the former ECSC members, may join it on certain conditions. Britain, which is currently outside the economic union, European Union, will not be able to resist the pressures of the Franco-German duo alone. If implemented, this scenario will eventually turn Europe into not only an economic, but also a political competitor to the United States. Besides, if the U.S. is for a certain period engulfed by domestic problems, old Europe will be able to more effectively resist the influence of U.S.-oriented Eastern European countries. All right, let's break this down a little bit. What they're afraid of is here what they're stating is they're afraid of a stronger Germany and France relationship because they have a lot of military, well, let's see, they got infrastructural integration with their pipelines and their electrical grid. Germany gets a lot of its power from nuclear, from French nuclear plants. But you have a big military integration around the Toulouse area.
It used to. I think they've all been turned off since the sanctions started because of one reason or another. France is basically on, I think, 70 or 80% capacity of like production. Like, I don't think they're exporting any more electricity, like currently.
Oh, for nuclear.
Yeah.
Yeah, they did start some again, but yeah, they've been trying to curtail it. They're trying to go green, and they're trying to do sanctions against Russia, and it's an incoherent policy. You're right.
Yeah.
But yeah, so Germany has a big industrial center in the Ruhr Valley along the Rhine, and France has their military industrial complex centered mostly around the Toulouse area. Yet Thales is there. The different Airbus places are there. Safran is there. You have a number of different big military industrial complexes around Toulouse. So what they're really afraid of is their military industrial complex integration. So that's in DIME, that's the military aspect, or Prometheus, the M aspect, either way. They're afraid that the existing Franco-German integration would make them a superpower, or at least definitely a regional power, and dominate Europe if the United States withdrew. So this is at odds with Trump, who wanted to reduce and focus on rebuilding the United States because we're trillions of dollars in debt and that needs to get paid down, and let Germany and France deal with Western Europe and deal with Russia. So in that case, the fear here is that Russia, France, and Germany would unite, and then that would overpower the United States in geostrategic theory. Yeah, let's move down to the next slide. Yeah, there you go. An increase in the flow of resources from Europe to the United States can be expected if Germany begins to experience a controlled economic crisis. The pace of the economic developments of the EU depends almost without alternative on the state of German economy. It is Germany that bears the brunt of the expenditures directed towards the poorer EU members. The current German economic model is based on two pillars. These are unlimited access to cheap Russian energy resources and to cheap French electric power, thanks to the operation of nuclear plants. The importance of the first factor is considerably higher. Halting Russian supplies can well create a systemic crisis that would be devastating for the German economy and indirectly for the entire European Union. The French energy sector could also soon experience heavy problems. The predictable stop of Russian-controlled nuclear supplies, combined with the unstable situation of the Sahel region, would make the French energy sector critically dependent on Australian and Canadian fuel. In connection with the establishment of AUKUS, it creates new opportunities to exercise pressure. However, this issue is beyond the scope of the present report. So this is what they're in this slide, they're anticipating putting sanctions on Russia and stopping the Nordstream gas pipelines that would then disrupt the German economy. So they're anticipating that and the collateral effects if they switch to more nuclear. They're going to have to get their uranium, plutonium from Canada or Australia.
I don't know. It sounds like Russian propaganda to me. All of this that you're.
Of course.
It's like.
Oh, we have to go over the Russian disinformation.
Oh, okay. So that's what we're doing. We're just disassembling the disinformation. All right. Perfect.
That's what we're doing.
Excellent.
Yeah. I want to make sure that people know what the Russian disinformation is. Okay.
Yeah. It's critical to see both sides to understand what's going on.
Yes, I like your style here. Okay, back to it. Due to coalition constraints, the German leadership is not in full control of the situation of the country. Thanks to our precise actions, it has been possible to block the commissioning of the Nordstream 2 pipeline, despite the opposition of lobbyists from the steel and chemical industries. So they're talking about Rheinmetall and they're talking about BASF and whoever else. The people that feed the German automaker industries. So anyway, next paragraph. However, the dramatic deterioration of the living standards may encourage leadership to reconsider its policy and return to the idea of European sovereignty and strategic autonomy. The only feasible way to guarantee Germany's rejection of Russia's energy supplies is to involve both sides in the military conflict in Ukraine. Our further actions in this country will inevitably lead to a military response from Russia. Russians will obviously not be able to leave unanswered the massive Ukrainian army pressure on the unrecognized Donbas republics. That would make it possible to declare Russia an aggressor and apply it to the entire package of sanctions prepared beforehand. Putin may in turn decide to impose limited counter-sanctions, primarily on Russian energy supplies to Europe. Thus, damage to EU countries will be quite comparable to the one in Russia, and in some countries, primarily Germany, it will be higher. The prerequisite for Germany to fall into this trap is the leading role of green parties and ideologies in Europe. The German Greens are strongly dogmatic, if not zealous, movement, which makes it quite easy to make them ignore economic arguments. In this respect, the German Greens somewhat exceed their counterparts in the rest of Europe. Personal features of the lack of professionalism of the leaders, primarily Annalena Baerbock and Robert Habeck, permit us to presume that it is next to impossible for them to admit their own mistakes in a timely manner. All right. There's a lot to unpack in this one slide. One of the reasons why I started the Unified Behavioral Theory Project is because like the Tupian Kosmides paper says, the Western University system abandoned the scientific project. The primary frameworks that I use, Aristotle's 6 forms of government, per capita GNP function, 4-category geopolitical form model, was to take Lipsitz's comparison of democratic forms of government to certain levels of economic development to move countries from third world status up to first world status. I moved it up to frameworks that would cover the full range of human behavior. That way you could laterally integrate them and have a floating scale. Okay, the reason why I do that is so anybody studying any discipline can get a cursory look to understand the fundamentals of how it affects the neighboring disciplines. So that way everybody would have a knowledge of collateral effects or second and third order effects of any policy decision. That's been taken away. So now you're going to have ideologues that are tunnel visioned and in positions of power that are going to make decisions and not calculate how bad it can be. John Hersanya, he won a Nobel Prize in 1994 with Selton and John Nash in game theory. He was advocating the lateral integration of disciplines in his 1960 paper. And his 1966 paper. What he was arguing was you needed everything in Pareto optimal and Nash equilibrium models. And that is, if you make a decision doing one thing, what are the pros of that? What are the cons of that? So you can start measuring opportunity costs and trade-offs on policy decisions. So by the models I use that cover the full range of human behaviors and laterally integrate, I can judge very quickly what the collateral consequences are going to be, for second and third order effects. So that's the benefit of Pareto optimal models. I was using the aeronautics as example the other day of lift, thrust, weight, and drag. If you want a cargo plane has to use bigger wings to get a heavier cargo plane off the air. But when you do that, you're going to slow it down in terminal velocity. So passenger airplanes and cargo airplanes have different wing and lift structures to them. So the point there is one thing happens at the expense of the other. So you've now taken this kind of linear programming models out, or physics style models out of the social sciences. So we now have political leaders that are in charge that can't really foresee the negative consequences of their decisions. So again, that's one slide, but if you look at it from a methodological point of view, there's a lot packed in there. That's why whoever wrote this knew what they were doing. Thus, okay, getting to the next slide. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, there you go. Thus, it will be enough quickly It will be enough to quickly form the media image of Putin's aggressive war to turn the Greens into ardent and hardline supporters of sanctions, a party of war.
Wait. Can we all say Putler? Can we all say Putler? Evil Putler.
Yeah.
He's just the worst.
Again,
let's turn off the heating. Let's turn off the heating and make him suffer. But yeah, I just wanted to interject that joke. You can continue. Sorry.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack here because the reason why I mentioned the Yuri Bezmenov video of the 1960s liberals taking over the university system, I said it for a bunch of reasons. Yep. Another reason is that the 1960s liberals may have been classical liberals, but they weeded out conservatives from graduate school. And so each 10 years, the next generation of graduate students and PhD students keep on becoming more radical leftist.
They're pulling the mean, basically.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. They're moving the mean way over.
Yeah.
Jonathan Haidt and Jordan Peterson talked about it in terms of getting rid of conservative opinions. No, it's way worse than that. They got rid of what theories should have been confirmed after the fall of the Soviet Union, were then discarded, and they kept what the Marx Engels theories that should have been disconfirmed, that should have been discarded. So they've done the opposite. So right here in this document, it's just a great way to show now you have leaders that can't see collateral effects. They can only see that they're striving towards some end of history goal of they're going to create this socialist utopia with no negative effects. Now, of course, that's not going to occur. It's going to be nothing but negative effects. So again, without a balanced opinion and confirmed theoretical frameworks, you get political parties that are now easily manipulated. All right, let's get back to it. I'll just, it will enable the sanctions regimes to introduce without any obstacles. The lack of professionalism of the current leaders will not allow a setback in the future, even when the negative impact of chosen policy becomes obvious enough. The partners in the German governing coalition will simply have to follow their allies, at least until a load of economic problems outweighs the fear of provoking a government crisis. However, even with the SPD and the FOP are ready to go against the Greens, the possibility for the next government to return relations with Russia to normal soon enough will noticeably be eliminated. Germany's involvement in large supplies of weapons and military equipment to the Ukrainian army will inevitably generate a strong mistrust in Russia and will make the negotiation process quite lengthy. If war continues, the Russian aggression against Ukraine are confirmed, the German political leadership will not be able to overcome its EU's partners' veto on assistance to Ukraine and reinforce sanctions packages.
Do we know when this fake document was written?
Well,
Not when it was like discovered or publicized, but when it was supposed to be written. Like what year, at least? Do we know?
Let's see. Let me look back on it. I mean, it's the photo of the leaked document says January of 2022 of this year. So that would be almost a month before the invasion.
Yeah.
Naya Dagblatt didn't publish it until when was that? September? Whenever that was in September.
All right. But
September 13th.
The point is, it's not years old. It's barely a year old, let's say, maximum. If it's a real document, of course.
Yeah, we're reading. I just went over. I gave just an off the cuff discussion of the 1992 Wolfowitz paper. Here we're reading this document because it's very concise. And then when we talk about the RAND 2019 articles that are still on their website that are confirmed, it's highly consistent. They're all highly consistent, and you can all trace them back to Mackinder's original theory. That's where we're going with this.
And not even the content matter, just the style of the writing, I would assume, is quite similar with the older reports that you'll discuss. Let's keep going.
Yeah. So I mean, the readers can decide. I mean, we're just going over the content. Let's see. So yeah, if war crimes and Russian aggression against Ukraine are confirmed, the German political leadership will not be able to overcome its EU's partners' veto on assistance to Ukraine and reinforce sanctions packages. This will ensure a sufficiently long gap in cooperation between Germany and Russia, and will make large German economic operators uncompetitive. So again, they're talking about increasing the cost of the energy supplies in order to make the German companies' products uncompetitive if they stay in Germany. So again, you've been on my Telegram channel since the beginning of the Felix Rex days. So we've been debating over the summer that German companies had 4 COAs, either go out of business, so that's the COA to avoid. COA is course of action, by the way. I put everything from past jobs, I put everything in military decision-making process language. So their second COA would be move to coal and nuclear. So by September, that didn't happen. It's getting colder.
Course of action is what you said the acronym was, yeah? COA?
Yeah, course of action, COA.
All right.
So the first COA that they want to avoid is go out of business, the German companies. The second one was they could have gone back to coal or nuclear, but by September, that didn't happen. So it looks like they were going to go back their third COA of reestablishing, of buying gas in rubles. Because Russia, because of sanctions, isn't going to get paid if they get it in dollars, because Wall Street just isn't going to transfer the money. So they can't get paid in dollars anymore. They got to get paid in euros or rubles, because the transaction has to take place in either Germany or St. Petersburg, one of the two. So then the fourth COA is the German companies have to leave. Now, the reason why we were debating those four COAs over the summer is because, on my Telegram channel, is as it gets colder and they didn't fire up their nuclear facilities and they didn't restart their coal production, well, then it was leading towards they're going to start buying gas in rubles. Well, again, going back to the last document, if they're buying oil and gas, and that would be, I think combined, we were talking about, it's 110 billion cubic meters of gas per year, which is enough to supply all of Central Europe. So it's just not, it just wouldn't be Germany that would be leaving the petrodollar system. It would be the whole Danube River Valley countries, because that German gas pipeline map goes to all the other neighboring countries. So, the reason why Nordstream blew up was because there's, you're in Central Europe. You see the protests on the weekends. They're growing as it gets colder. If all it took was for the German politicians just to cave in to the protesters, they would just say, okay, yeah, we'll trade Russian oil and gas in euros and rubles. We'll leave the petrodollar, but that would be, let's just say, 6 to 10 countries leaving the petrodollar at once.
And in the middle of Europe. And in the middle of Europe. It wouldn't be just any 6 countries. It's a significant chunk, let's say, of the U.S. petrodollar trade.
So then that would cement the dime integration of Russia with the German world. So this document is trying to stop that integration, is what that's, again, whoever wrote this, we're talking about the content, not the authenticity of it. But that's what's behind this document.
Russian propaganda.
Yes, the Russian propaganda, of course.
So, expected consequences.
Yeah. So let's see. Let's move on to the next one, because, like I said, we've been debating this. We've been debating this topic, all summer long on my Telegram channel. So I just want to get this out there on a YouTube video. And then this document happened to come up that a contributor to our chat channel posted. So let's see, getting back to the next one. A reduction in Russian energy supplies, ideally a complete halt of such supplies, would lead to disastrous outcomes for German industry. The need to divert significant amount of Russian gas for winter heating of residential and public facilities will further exacerbate the shortages. Lockdowns in industrial enterprise will cause shortages of components and spare parts for manufacturing, a breakdown of logistics chains, and eventually a domino effect. A complete standstill at the largest chemical, metallurgical, machine building plants is likely, while there are virtually no spare capacity to reduce energy consumption. It could lead to the shutting down of continuous cycle enterprises, which could mean their destruction. By that, they're talking about specifically the BASF plant along the Rhine, the one that I was talking to Micheal Jan about recently. The cumulative losses of the German economy could be estimated only approximately. Even if the restriction of Russian supplies is limited to 2022, its consequences will last for several years, and the total losses could reach 2 to 300 billion euros. Not only will it deliver a devastating blow to the German economy, but the entire EU economy will inevitably collapse. We are talking not about a decline in economic growth pace, but about a sustained recession and a decline in GDP only in material production by 3 to 4% per year for the next 5 to 6 years. Such a fall will inevitably cause panic in the financial markets and may bring them to a collapse. The euro will inevitably, and most likely irreversibly, fall below the dollar. A sharp fall of the euro will consequently cause its global sale. It will become a toxic currency, and all countries in the world will rapidly reduce their share in the Forex reserves. This gap will be primarily filled with dollar and yuan.
That last bit has a little bit of wishful thinking in it.
Well,
the dollar and
again,
yuan part is kind of optimistic. Let's put it that way.
Well, yeah, there's just a lot to unpack in these slides. You know, like I mean, I can spend an hour talking about each slide, right? But here, what they're setting up is for the German companies to have to leave but go to America. But they're also talking about, with all the money printing that the United States has been doing to fund our $31 trillion in debt, Kudlow and Kramer called the US dollar the best dirty shirt around back, I don't know, they were back on the Kudlow and Kramer show in the early to mid 2000s. I think they went off there. I think they broke up those shows in 2008, 2009 or something like that. Or maybe it was later. I can't remember. But Larry Kudlow would always talk about how the United States dollar kept a relatively high demand globally because it was still a safe place to put money vis-a-vis other currencies. You know, especially if you compare it to to Argentina or the Mexican peso or something like that. I mean, the third world currencies, you can't put their money there. The ruble is not convertible because it's not widely used outside of Russia. Yuan was unconvertible. China's been developing the RMB to be more convertible, hence the Shanghai Cooperation Organization is trying to make a convertible RMB for China. It's growing more in influence, and of course, Russia is trading and set up a ruble exchange with the rupees in India. So alternative exchanges are occurring, and Saudi Arabia, Mohammed bin Salman is announced a few weeks ago because he got mad at Biden. He doesn't really like Biden. Started trading in yuan, started selling oil for Chinese RMB because they can sell them oil and then buy just a ton of Chinese electronic goods and everything else and balance out their supply disruptions or just park it there for future use.
Yep, that was a big hit to the petrodollar system.
Yeah, so you have countries, well, okay, you have Russia, China, and Saudi Arabia, and even Qatar, I believe, starting to leave the petrodollar, but then you also have the Central Asian stands that are trading directly their oil and gas in RMB because they're trading directly for Russian-made goods. I mean, for Chinese-made goods or Russian-made goods. Mostly Chinese, obviously, because that's what the currency is, to balance their trade current account deficits. So, okay, so let's move to the next one. Another inevitable consequence of a prolonged economic recession will be a sharp drop in living standards and rising unemployment, up to 200 to 400,000 people in Germany alone, which will entail the exodus of skilled labor and well-educated young people. There are literally no other destinations for such immigration other than the United States today. A somewhat smaller, but also quite significant flow of migrants can be expected from other EU countries. This scenario under consideration will thus serve to strengthen the national financial conditions, both indirectly and most directly. In the short term, it will reverse the trend of the looming economic recession and in addition, consolidate American society by distracting it from the immediate economic concerns. This, in turn, will reduce electoral risks. In the medium term, 4 to 5 years, the cumulative benefits of capital flight, reoriented logistical flows, and reduced competition in major industries may amount to $7 to $9 trillion. Unfortunately, China is also expected to benefit over the medium term from this emerging scenario. At the same time, Europe's deep political dependence on the US allows us to effectively neutralize possible attempts by individual European states to draw closer to China. All right, so this was the last slide set. I just wanted to...
Breathtaking.
Yeah, I just wanted to read through this because it's just so much to unpack in this. It's worth sharing with the general audience. Like I keep on saying, this Russian propaganda piece, right?
Yep.
It doesn't matter whether it's authentic.
It's a plant. It's not even propaganda. It's a plant.
Yeah, it's a plan either way. It's written by a subject matter expert either way, and it explains what we've been seeing.
Mm-hmm.
So if it's highly explanatory, it's highly predictive. So I was watching other videos where this kind of language is repeated because some of the, what was I watching? I was watching just other YouTube videos on pipelines and ports and China and the Ukraine war kind of stuff. And I need to go back and find them. I posted them on our Telegram channel that we chat in. But yeah, there's other YouTube channels that coincidentally mirror this language.
Mm-hmm.
And if you look at one of the videos I did with Matt Bracken, we were talking about the different Mockingbird videos.
Yeah.
Where you can tell that we have no funding. Our production quality is really low. But you can tell with these other video producers, their production value is quite high to the point that you got to be talking about each individual video is probably costing $5,000 or $10,000. If it costs, they put out a lot of videos, so they're not just hiring a full-time video tech person. They're not hiring a video tech person that does that full-time. They are hiring full-time exclusively. So you're not talking about a $3,000 a month expenditure. You're talking about a $5,000 to $10,000 per month expenditure on just that one person. Then you're talking about someone to do the content. Then you're talking about someone to also to help produce it and do the site
social
arrangements.
media stuff, and then behind the scenes finding the people and the contacting, fixing, or whatever you want to call it. Yeah. No, there's definitely like an industry behind it, and you're right. When you see podcasts that are overproduced and heavy on the narrative and not too, how should I say, dissecting of information given, it becomes see-through. It becomes see-through, as you're pointing out.
Yeah. If again, the reason why I keep on going back to my three macro frameworks of Aristotle 6.4 from the government, the per capita GDP function, and the four-category geopolitical form model is with the knowledge of those disciplines, you can anticipate collateral effects very, very quickly. But when you look at videos and you start to see how they're one-sided, they start to become blatantly one-sided. If you weren't aware of this, if you're just a regular or normal person watching the videos, you're going to be like, wow, this is a great, video on geology or geography of China or Russia without understanding the geopolitical bias behind them. And there's a bunch of them.
Yeah, and they get promoted by YouTube, to put it lightly. The overproduced ones which obviously have like a team working behind them, and like you say, to like the unaware mind, they might appear objective and impartial, but if you actually know the terminology, the history, the matter, and the like sociology or psychology that you bring into the mix, as well as the theories of geopolitics that are 200 plus years old, there's a lot there to unpack for somebody who is just clicking for a 10-minute video on the geography of Russia or Ukraine.
Yeah. Well, our videos are not going to be, for a general audience. Like I said, it's going to be more for the graduate school types of people that are really into this.
Yeah.
I get it, but I don't care, because we're never going to be promoted in the algorithms anyway.
Exactly.
It doesn't matter.
I'm not hoping for the algorithm to help me much with any of the videos that I'm working on. Yeah. But in any case, it's been an hour and 20 minutes, and I think we did an excellent job, or you did, I should say, of covering section 3 of the 6-power strategy. Is that 6-power center strategy? That's what you want to coin. That's your let's say twist on the 5-power center strategy.
Yeah.
Original.
Well, let's just breeze through the other slide sets real quick and not spend much time on them. I spend way more time than I planned on breaking down each slide. So this thing took a lot longer than we anticipated. But like I said, each slide, if you don't know the background information from the other disciplines behind it, you can just read over it and not think it's that big of a deal. If you understand,
you want to get into the Fiona Hill.
Okay, so
is that where?
That one. Yeah, this is another one of those overproduced videos. This is just an example of that, and she's not talking about any of the subject matter that I talk about. So click to the next one.
Okay, hold on.
Click to the next one, because this is these videos have to take. Okay, it's not just Fiona Hill and Lex Friedman. It's there's a whole team behind them, and they're highly promoted in the algorithms. Okay, switch down to the next one. All right, my favorite Indian woman, Palki Sharma Upadhyay. I've been watching her shows on WION for years. She's left WION and went to another show. But yeah, she, the Indian news covers this very differently, because they're so furious that the United States not only trained and equipped the Mujahideen once, but then they came back and trained and equipped the same people under a different name under the Taliban twice. Okay, maybe it was a legitimate nation building or regime change nation building program that just did not work. And the reasons why it didn't work, well, I don't know, we'll go over it in another video, but the Taliban, in short, ran their shadow governments out of the mosque, talked about it with a bunch of people. And that's why Afghanistan fell apart so quickly after the withdrawal, and why the Afghan army broke up along ethnic and religious lines. So I throw in the Indian news here because they are so furious at the U.S. in general, and the Biden administration in particular, that their videos that are that have a high production value put out a totally different story. So they talk about the expansion of NATO in this slide set. It was not supposed to. James Baker, Secretary of State James Baker, had promised Gorbachev that they would not move NATO 1 inch east past the Oder River in Germany. So Palki Sharma talks about the number of countries that they moved to. We don't need to go through them all because your listing is, people just need the general idea that they moved it east every year during the mid to late 1990s up to the present, and the goal of which is to block in Russia's ports and pipelines to protect the petrodollar. That's the takeaway of this. So, okay, I went over in the Matt Bracken video, again, hardly anybody's talking about it. The degree that the European Union Association Agreement of 2014, it was supposed to be a free trade agreement going both ways, and that's what they told the people. And in actuality, Ukraine could only trade west, not east, which would have devastated their economy, not grown it, more than likely. And more importantly, it's designed to stop the Russian use of the Rostov-on-Don port. It would become, well, the purpose of the agreement is to kick the Russian Black Sea Fleet out of Sevastopol. That's what the purpose was. Indian news will talk about it, not just Palki on Wyon, but there's a whole bunch of other ones. Indian news will talk about it because they're like, hey, this destabilization in Afghanistan, Pakistan, and the Central Asian stands is awfully coincidental with the increased pressure in the Donbass, and you have the agitation propaganda going on in Iran.
So Indian news is conspiracy theory news, is what I'm hearing from you.
Yeah, it's Russian propaganda, obviously.
And conspiracy theory news. Like the fact that they're so proximally close to like these locations and these issues geographically has nothing to do with their leaning towards the truth. I doubt it.
Yeah, and for the American audience, yeah, wherever there's pipeline and infrastructure projects going on, just happens to be, they have their own style of peaceful protesters, just like the Antifa BLM riots. They're this similar type of organized events are occurring wherever there's a pipeline or railroad infrastructure project.
Like in Syria, like in Libya.
Yeah, so whenever, eventually you catch on, whenever Sigar or Iraqi, the special investigator for Iraq reconstruction, so you have Sigar and Sigir, whenever they notice, $1 billion missing or something like that, it always follows that there's some kind of color revolution or some kind of, peaceful protesters going up in a neighboring country where there's a pipeline or railroad or port project. It just never fails. After you start seeing the correlation, you really start seeing the correlation. All right, so then just to finish up this slide set, these are the books by Mackinder. The next slide set, yeah. Then the next slide set is Nicholas Spikeman, He's a Dutch guy who was on ships working in the Dutch East Indies and Indonesia, Malaysia, Indonesia, Borneo, the whole South China Sea area. So that's how he became familiar with the choke points of the Strait of Hormuz. He went through the Suez Canal, and he went through the Straits of Malacca a lot. So that's how he got to know the maritime choke points of the world. And then he went to Yale to get his PhD and wrote these books. He died at age 50 in 1944, I believe it was. One of his graduate students, finished the book for him. Took his fair draft up to a final draft. He was almost done with it, and so that was his second smaller book. Oh, okay, the bottom picture here that's George Kennan, who wrote the Long Telegram that started the strategies of containment discussed by the different John Lewis Gaddis books. Yeah, there's a whole bunch of other ones. It's not just Zbigniew Brzezinski and the Grand Chessboard. There's other ones. I wanted to give people some examples of how Brzezinski got his ideas. Yeah, Graham Allison, another big Cold War writer, wrote some books too. He wrote the book called Thucydides' Trap not too long ago, talking about this inevitable conflict. I didn't have it in this one, but I got it in other slide sets. He's a really super famous professor that writes in this genre also. So yeah, that concludes this video, and I'm glad we got it out of the way, even though it's a lot for people to digest in one spot.
What can I say? You've done it in a stunning manner, an hour and 30 minutes, if it wasn't for my interrupting you. And I hope my humor or attempts at it didn't put anybody off. This has been an excellent show, as always, with George. Thank you, George, for coming. Thank you to the audience for all of you who stayed to the very end. If you like this, if you think that there's anybody who might be interested in hearing and learning some of the stuff that George has shared with us, be sure to forward this or share it with them. If you like the video, there's a button somewhere down here for that. And yeah, see you guys in the next one. Thank you again, George.
Thank you.